Rick Neuheisel, college football analyst, former UCLA, Colorado, Washington head coach, joins us on the program. We have Brian Kelly next hour. You get one question for Brian Kelly. What would you ask him?
How much does he like gumbo?
Okay. I'm going to.
This is a monster hire, and good for Brian. He's so deserving of it.
Okay. How do you do this in a tactful way? Leaving Notre Dame to take a job like this, and everybody, from what I'm told, behind the scenes at Notre Dame was shocked. So how do you do it in a classy way?
Well, from behind the scenes, what I'm being told is that he and Jack Swarbrick were at odds in terms of upgrades to the Notre Dame program.
Wait a minute. Hold on, Rick. I got a bad connection there. We'll see if we can reconnect there. So what were you saying about Brian Kelly and Jack Swarbrick?
Well, the word on the street is, and I don't have confirmation from Brian on this, that they were at odds in terms of upgrades for the program to take it to the next level. And obviously, Brian's hearing from an agent that there's this great, desire for him elsewhere. And you can't blame a guy for going for a $95 million deal and a chance to recruit the defensive lineman that you can get at LSU, which was exactly the reason Nick Saban left Michigan State for LSU.
Okay, explain Notre Dame in trying to get certain how difficult is it, the limitations of trying to get players into Notre Dame?
You're not in charge of two things at Notre Dame, whereas in a lot of these schools, you can get anybody in. So you're not in charge of admissions. So there's going to be a ceiling as to what you can do in terms of getting kids into school. And you're not in charge of discipline. You're going to, how many times have we seen Notre Dame with the honor code, kids not being able to play? Nick Saban puts them in a ride along with the local security, and they're back on the field. So you're not in charge of those things. And those might seem like little things, but those are game changers when you're trying to, play for the big prizes.
How does it work behind the scenes that you could put a deal together and it feels like it's a 24-hour period? How did you do it, or your agent do it, so you can stay clean? Because you can say, I didn't speak to anybody, but your agent certainly did.
Yeah. Well, those conversations obviously are going on, and you just make sure that your agent understands you don't want to be bothered until it's the appropriate time. What I would say, though, Dan, is we need to move the appropriate time at least a week later. And the reason we can't is because of this December signing date. I would push all my fellow coaches, or what used to be my fellow coaches, towards going back to a February signing date. Stop this nonsense, because the transfer portal is going crazy. You're going to end up choosing from that buffet line first anyway. And let this coaching carousel wait till after this weekend, after we've made the determinations as to who's in the playoff. To hear Gary Barta last night say that the committee may weigh in, that Brian Kelly's absence could have a factor in whether or not Notre Dame should be in the college football playoff, that's nonsense.
Yeah.
And we're doing it to ourselves. Coaches just need to wait one more week for all this carousel to begin. And if we'll move recruiting back to where it belongs, we can get that accomplished.
Yeah, I said the same thing about 15 minutes ago, that let's say Nick Saban was sick and couldn't be in a playoff game, or would they hold it against Nick Saban? The fact that Notre Dame got this far and Brian Kelly's not coaching, why am I penalizing Notre Dame again for Brian Kelly taking the LSU job? I think that's embarrassing that the committee is going to use that.
It's unfathomable to me. I can't understand it. And if I were a Notre Dame player, I would be absolutely irate. I mean, they're sitting there in the 6 hole. It doesn't take a lot of imagination nor a lot of chaos this weekend to get Notre Dame into the top 4. And you can argue about their strength of schedule and such, but you can't sit there and say, well, their head coach is gone.
Yeah.
That to me is ridiculous. You wouldn't say it if their left guard was gone, so you shouldn't say it because their head coach is gone.
Better job, Notre Dame, USC, LSU?
I've always said, and you'll know I'm a West Coast honk, that the SC job is as good a job as there is in college football. It sits right in the middle of Southern California, which is laden with talent. Unfortunately, much of that talent for the Pac-12 has been leaving, right? The two quarterbacks that were on top of the Heisman race, C.J. Stroud at Ohio State and Bryce Young at Alabama, are both Southern California kids. I mean, that's where they're from. And Lincoln Riley coming to SC is the best news for not only SC, it's the best news for the Pac-12 and certainly George Kliavkoff as he starts to negotiate the next TV deal.
Then would you have LSU over Notre? Is LSU a better job than Notre Dame?
Listen, Notre Dame has the most mystique of any of the teams in college football. And for that reason, it's kind of like a rock band when they come to your town. Everybody wants to go and see. And that makes it exciting. It's why they stay as competitive as they do, because for a lot of kids, that's an exciting deal. But LSU every year is going to get the best from the state of Louisiana. They're the only Power 5 school in that state, and that is an unbelievable region for great college football talent, in particular defensive front guys. And those guys are the gold bullion of college football.
Yeah, it sounds strange for somebody like us, our age, to say that LSU is a better job than Notre Dame. But the reality is LSU is a better job than Notre Dame.
And then it begs the question, and this had to factor in Lincoln Riley's, as he mashed this all up, what is the SEC going to be now that you're adding Texas, you're adding Oklahoma, 16 teams, there's probably going to be 4-team pods. LSU, if I'm just doing my own pods divvy up, LSU is going to be with A&M, probably the 2 Tennessee schools. So you're sitting there going, that's not a bad gig. You're going to have to play Alabama every other year, but not every year. So maybe not as good. But that Oklahoma gig for Lincoln Riley to be in the SEC recruiting against all those guys, or being in the West Coast and being the big fish in the pond like he is currently in the Big 12, adding $110 million to that package makes that pretty attractive. What
do you do if you're Luke Fickell at Cincinnati?
Well, he's got to be the favorite to get the Notre Dame job. I had it on pretty good authority that he was very close to the SC situation, but waiting to see what happened at Notre Dame. The question is, was Marcus Freeman going to leap in front of him and take that job? Remember, Brian Kelly pointed out that Marcus Freeman was a head coach in waiting, whether it was at Notre Dame or somewhere else. And it's interesting, Dan, that Jack Swarbrick saying may not name an interim. I think he would do that because he wants Luke Fickell rather than putting Marcus Freeman in as the interim and having the kids all respond to him, as I think we all know that they would.
Yeah, he's the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. I wondered about this prior to the Michigan-Ohio State game. If Jim Harbaugh had lost last week, could you have seen a scenario where maybe he looked at it and said, I've gone as far as I can go here, and maybe I go back to the NFL?
I don't think so. I think Jim Harbaugh is a throwback, and it's not just because of the glasses he wears. I think he was going to ascend Mount Everest until he got to the top and got to summit and plant a flag. And, as much as I've had difficulty with Jim in the past, it was actually fun to see him get that done. That was as collegiate a scene as I can remember, with all that maze on that sideline in the aftermath of that win. And Aiden Hutchinson talking the way he did about what it meant is everything you love about college football.
How tense did it get between you and Jim Harbaugh?
Oh, well, in the aftermath of that game where they beat us 17-9, and I'm driving down the field and just don't get it in. And so I go over to shake his hand, and he slaps my hand and says, "What do you think about that, Ricky?" And then it got tense.
If it was go time, how would it have played out, Rick?
Well, I probably would have lost, but I would have been in such a furor, I would have just gone for it. I mean, he's a little bigger than I am, but you know what? I just remember the shock that came over me. And then you remember he did the same thing to Schwartz when he was in the NFL and Schwartz was with the Lions. And I was literally watching film that day after our Saturday game. And I said, he did it again. And everybody's wondering what the heck is going on. And I said, and Schwartz is going after him. And I'm sitting there, kind of mad at myself that I didn't do the same. But no, listen, he is I liken him. If he's on your team, you absolutely love him. And if he's not, you want the next shot at him.
But he called out Ryan Day after the win over Ohio State. He was like, hey, some guys wake up on third base and want to tell you that they hit a triple. And I'm like, wow.
I'm not into the pop culture and all this stuff, but he is the ultimate troller. Ultimate troller.
Great to talk to you again, as always, Rick. Thank you, buddy.
Happy holidays, my friend. Enjoy the weekend.
Rick Neuheisel, CBS college football analyst, former UCLA, Colorado, and Washington head coach.